Okay.
You're good.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, good evening, everyone. This is Katie Crystal, Chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission and of the Executive Committee. Good evening. Welcome to our October 1st Exec Committee meeting. We are beginning this meeting at 5:33 p.m. Given the ongoing public health emergency, we are, as has become our recent custom, conducting this meeting electronically. Let it be known that our NVTC staff followed the guidelines and the procedures and the enabling legislation to meet electronically and gave notice to the Commission, the staff, and the public. This meeting is simultaneously being broadcast to the public on YouTube, so welcome anyone who is joining us. I think we all probably have the hang of WebEx by now. As usual, if you could mute when you're not speaking, that helps us cut down on background noise. As a ongoing reminder, no public business may be conducted over that chat function, so please use it for technical difficulties only. And Kate, if you could go ahead and call the roll to identify the committee members who are here.
Absolutely. So Chair Crystal.
Here.
Mr. Aguirre.
Here.
Ms. Filler-Korn. Mr. Letourneau. Mr. McKay. Mr. Meyer.
Here.
Mr. Smedberg. Mr. Smedberg? Looks like he has a little internet trouble, so hopefully we're going to be able to connect with him shortly. And Mr. Snyder.
Here.
Thank you so much. And Kate, I think we have some other staff present as well, right?
We do. Obviously this is Kate Mattice, Executive Director. We have the Director of Finance and Administration, Scott Colcorth. We have our Web and IT Manager, Melissa Walker, and our Legislative Liaison, Amy Perrin-Cyber.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Melissa, for getting us up and running. Okay, so we do have ahead of us, or before us rather, the summary of the September 3rd Executive Committee meeting. There is no formal action needed, but if anybody has any corrections, now would be a time to raise them. Okay, hearing none. Just a brief preview of our agenda tonight. It's going to be a really busy meeting. In particular, we're welcoming Paul Wiedefield, the General Manager of WMATA, deferred from his September appearance, but I think actually more timely for being with us in October. But we're definitely anticipating a pretty robust conversation given the serious measures ahead at WMATA regarding the budget. We have a couple of other things happening as well in the Commission, so I'm going to turn it to Kate to preview some of those items.
Absolutely. So indeed, we do have, first of all, I did want to mention that we did have some public comments, and those were sent out to all of the commissioners in advance. So I did want to highlight to you that we have 3 public comments that were received by our deadline at 3 o'clock. 2 of them voiced some concern with cutting WMATA's transit service in Northern Virginia in light of our proposed WMATA budget. And then the third comment that we had, which again, the full text of which has gone out to all of the commissioners. This individual is demanding that the commission provide information to him regarding the number of items of the proposed commuter choice round 4 selection that were included. All of these items were actually included in materials at our September and in this month's commission meeting, as well as to our September 17th PAC meeting. And they actually are all available on our public website. The commentator also made data requests for details on the historic and future proposed toll revenue collections overall, as well as the financial plan for Long Bridge project. Madam Chair, I'd suggest they may be better directed to other outside parties. Just one last thing, this commentator did request, and I'm just going to read the quote, the NVTC must pass a resolution prohibiting any use of I-66 toll revenues for the Long Bridge and related improvements until such time as Arlington County and Alexandria have committed to funding an appropriate share of the 3.4+ billion capital costs from taxpayers in those jurisdictions. And that concludes the public comments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mattice. Thank you for so well summarizing those, including those that came in maybe a little late formally for our commuter choice program. So appreciate your going the extra mile to do that. Any questions or comments about those? All right, well, I can't help but resist the opportunity to say the Long Bridge project will primarily benefit those from outside of the inner jurisdictions of Arlington and Alexandria by enabling a transit-oriented commute for those from much further distances than Arlington and Alexandria. Okay, so thank you, Kate, very much. And I think there are a few other items to preview on the agenda, right?
Absolutely. So we do have 2 items on the consent agenda. One of the things that we're trying to do is consolidate the roll call vote, but clearly have everything out there. So our 2 items on the consent agenda, one is which the resolution for us to proceed and have the commission meeting electronically. We've combined that with our annual notice of direct contribution to the jurisdictions. That is an annual, exactly the same actually total dollar amount that goes out to our jurisdictions that they fund out of their operating budgets for next year. We do have 2 actions on the commuter choice program. As the chair mentioned, we had public comment open for the commuter choice program, provided all those public comments actually to our program advisory committee meeting, and they've got a program and a resolution that they'd like the commission to consider. We also included in that commuter choice is our annual report, and basically accepting that annual report for us to report to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And then finally, we do have 1 VRE action, which is their preliminary 2022 operating and capital budget, and to have that okay to get referred over to the jurisdictions. Finally, as in other highlights of the meeting, as you mentioned, our general manager from WMATA, Paul Wiedefeld, will be joining us. And we'll hear our usual reports from our WMATA board members and the chair of our committees. We'll be able to present the 3% cap working group study for the commission's review this month. And then also finally updates on the legislative actions. As you see, we've got Amy with us right here. She'll speak a little bit later this evening. And finally, we do have our annual transit report. Staff are just going to provide a brief little overview, but it does really show how transit was doing very, very well, and then really precipitated down in that last quarter. So that is to confirm, that's basically what we do have on the agenda. It is a busy and full agenda with lots of great opportunities for robust conversation.
Thank you so much, Kate. Colleagues, do we have any questions about what to expect with the agenda ahead? The presentations we'll be receiving, the opportunity to hear from GM Wiedefield. Okay, and I guess we'll all live it in real time shortly. I also wanted to just provide this opportunity, despite, we've met in exec only for the second time today recently, but I know our committees have actually been quite active, virtually taking advantage of the opportunity to meet electronically. So I wanted to invite our committee chairs actually to share a little bit about what their committees have been working on, at least in this smaller context of executive committee. So in no particular order, Kennick, our WMATA committee chair, would you want to share with us any updates or conversations happening at that committee?
Sure. I think the 3% working group, which you were chairing, was a big deal, right? And the end results of that were basically not to change any of the legislation wording. And the elephant in the room is the budget. And we're going to have GM Wiedefield with us tonight, so the rest of the commission will have a chance to kind of get their questions in and everything. But that's this is what all major transportation groups are dealing with across the country, and we're no different. So unless we're getting a huge amount of money in, we're going to have to deal with some very, very difficult decisions.
Thank you. I think we'll have a broader conversation about some of those really pretty devastating trade-offs later in the evening. And I don't doubt that Paul is looking forward to living those conversations again with us, as he's been doing chairing the WMATA board. So, all right. Mr. Meyer, our Legislative and Policy Committee Chair, would you like to give an update? See you there?
Yes, I'm here. I just had to unmute me. We met last month on September 10, and we had a discussion on our 2021 agenda for, for the whole year, but especially for the General Assembly. On the state level, we have 6 priorities. And then on the feds, 4. And I'm just going to briefly go over this because we're going to talk about it at 7 o'clock. Next year, because last January was so transformative, at this point, our priorities on the state level are first to protect the existing programs and revenue streams that we already have in place. And given the pandemic, there may be a tendency by a few members to want to adjust or reduce our funding, and we certainly are going to maintain a close watch on that. And we also want to continue to ask for expanded support for rail efforts, including especially for Long Bridge. Obviously, we're going to put a stake in the ground for restoring NVTA funding and ensuring that our policies and priorities that have a direct link between transit and promoting social and social justice and equity issues, which is somewhat that was not present last year. So that is going to be something that's going to be kind of a matrix over everything that we do. We're going to be seeking some flexibility for joint public bodies to meet remotely, which is something that would benefit the NVTC, and ongoing recognition that the NVT should be the regional body to continue to administer transit programs such as the commuter choice program. There are always that idea that maybe that we should consolidate these regional commissions and authorities into one body, and we're going to drive home the fact that is not something that would benefit the region or really the Commonwealth. At the federal level, 4 priorities: continued support for the try to stem the losses for transit revenues, support to cover the cost of our losses because of the pandemic. Obviously, renewing federal funding for WMATA, reauthorizing the FAST Act, and seeking federal support for major capital projects in the region, such as the Long Bridge. And most of you are aware of the letter that went out of Metro Now Transit that went out this past Monday on September 28th. It was sent to the 24 elected officials in Maryland, Virginia, and DC from, I think there were 94 signatories, or 93 signatories of local elected officials and transit stakeholders. So we certainly wanted to go on record for the funding for Metro. And that's kind of it for our legislative and policy agenda at this point. We will be meeting, I think on October 15. So we'll have more work to do and something more substantive to report in November.
Thank you very much, Dave, for that presentation and for the work of the committee. I think I've been pleased to add our name as NVTC to some of those efforts to advocate for the desperate need for a second federal package. And certainly if WMATA finds itself in trouble, we know that we are in the same boat as rail systems around the country. So we really appreciate your organizing that advocacy on our behalf.
I'm not going to belabor the point about the new HEROES Act. I think all of you are already up to speed on it, so we won't take any time now on that. But we did have the Northern Virginia Regional Commission had a meeting of all of the mayors and chairs with Jerry Connolly, who gave us an overview of this. There is just this week they came out with a new draft HEROES Act. You all know that it has some money for transit nationally. There are not that many jurisdictions nationally that have major transit systems, so it's not going to get the same support, although there was some funding put in for Amtrak, which will expand the number of districts that will benefit from this proposed legislation. Who knows what's going to happen between now and November 3, but it is theoretically possible, but highly unlikely that something will happen before then.
Thank you. Seems like an accurate characterization. All right, excellent. And then last but certainly not least, Mr. Meyer, our PAC committee chair. Any updates? I'm sorry, Mr. Snyder. Did I just call you Mr. Meyer? Dave, I'm sorry.
I'm honored to be confused with Mayor Meyer. Now, he may not feel the same way, but I surely am honored.
If there's anybody that would be I would be associated with, it would be you. Thanks.
But you not really want to be associated with anybody. Okay, I got it. Anyway, thank you. Our committee had to deal with one of the, I guess, the downsides from the pandemic and the total upending of the transportation system that affected, in this case, the toll revenues on I-66. And so, working with Kate and under the constraints of the Commonwealth Transportation Board, we came up with a program Kate, why don't you summarize the two component parts, and then I'll spend a bit more time on the actual resolution.
Absolutely. And so indeed, as we had introduced to the commission last month and then talked through with the program advisory committee this month, the staff and then the program advisory committee is asking the commission to move forward with sort of a two-part decision, one of which is a set of projects for a very conservative, I think it's under $4 million. And those would be projects that could be immediately, they're existing projects that would just continue allowing those routes to continue going, as well as some smaller capital projects that could be implemented and put in place in time for when things start rebounding next year. But the other second important part, and this is actually within the resolution, is recognition that we actually had a number of projects apply. But because we had such little money this year, we know that there's a whole bunch of other good projects and they've been scored. And so what we've included in this resolution is that other set of projects for consideration by the commission. And again, the technical scores are very clearly showing how strong those projects are. And so the proposal as a part of this is for the commission, when they come back, to come back, I should say, in the spring, and look exactly at that same list and look at the technical scores and knowing what funding that we will know at that point. And we do have to put it up for public comment, but those are the projects that should be considered. And so that is the resolution is written to include both of those parts. The materials that were sent out to the commission include both of those parts. Mr. Snyder, do you want to mention some tightening of the language that you'd like to see in that resolution?
Yeah, Kate, you may have the resolution in front of you. Is it the second resolved or?
It is the second resolved clause, yes.
Second resolved. And what we're going to make clear, a bit more clear with the language, is exactly what Kate said, which is that the future funding, if future funding becomes available, then we will go down the list that's already been established by the technical scoring that's already been done. It seemed to us to make no sense to go through the whole technical scoring process again. And we simply will then move down through those list of projects when the money becomes available. And again, there's a requirement for public comment. And obviously we wouldn't move any further down that list than there's money available. But the whole idea was we were going to do a huge number of the projects from one list, and lo and behold, we ended up with a whole lot less money. So we're going to go with what the money that we know we have, fund those projects, but then not penalize the projects that scored well, but just say you're in a second tranche, if you will, when funding becomes available, and then there's a public comment requirement. So the language basically just clarifies that point.
Thank you, and thanks for working on that too, Dave. I know that that's personal, that need, but also being cognizant of a number of really excellent projects that were in that vote. So appreciate your working with our staff on that, and look forward to bringing forward that amendment in a broader conversation.
Thank you, and thanks to Kate and all the staff. It was very difficult. It's a classic example of one of the circumstances that we have to deal with as a result of all this stuff that's going on that's pandemic related.
A common theme across the committees, I think. So thank you all for your work. And just as a reminder, our WMATA committee will meet next on October 29th at 6 p.m. and our next legislative and policy committee will be October 15th at 10 a.m., both virtual. So anyone interested in attending those can get further details from our staff with a login. Any questions or comments about any of our committee reports? Okay. Hearing none. The other thing that we wanted to do in this executive session was talk a little bit with Scott and Kate to preview the upcoming year's budget. Obviously we're doing this budget, starting to talk about it in October for fiscal 22. As you all know, our bylaws actually require that we present the fiscal year budget, or rather that staff presents a fiscal year budget to us in December so we can approve in January. So we find ourselves here just a couple of months into fiscal 21, now starting to talk about fiscal 22, which of course means that there is a lot that is really uncertain. But I wanted to welcome Kate, and I think Scott is here too to talk in greater detail about sort of background on the budget, what to expect for the year ahead, and how that budget construction is working.
Oh, thank you so much. And indeed, I think I'm going to give Scott a break, but he's available to answer any questions. But so indeed, Madam Chair, as you mentioned, our bylaws actually, and there's actually a long history to it. And I'm still finding more and more every day. But bringing the budget really, really early, again, quite early in the fiscal year. But, you know, it is important for us to be talking through with you in advance. So we are working through a budget, but we want to talk to you, hear from you, priorities, concerns, questions, what have you, so that we can bring a budget for your consideration here at the Executive Committee next month. And then moving forward for a review in December and approval in January. So we still have a little bit of time. This is very much a preview. But I did want to give a little bit of background, sort of talk about, you know, the different revenue variables and the different expense variables that we have associated with our budget. In general, the revenue of our general administrative budget is really three major sources. One of which is direct contributions from the jurisdictions, and that actually is included on the consent agenda. This makes up about 8% of our overall operating budget. And in fact, it's the same total dollar value since 2008. So what we do is really try to minimize the assets coming directly from the jurisdictions from your own budgets. The second part, which is 56%, is actually off the top of the DRPT state aid that our jurisdictions that we are, you know, administering and managing on behalf of the jurisdictions, and that makes up about 56% of our budget. And just to give you a sense of sort of what that looks like, in fiscal year 2020, we administer about $200 million worth of state aid on behalf of all of these jurisdictions, and that administrative share was about 1%. And so that's just to give you a little bit of level of magnitude. Our sort of overhead averages about 1% of those. But that is where the lion's share of our funding comes from. And then, of course, just in the last 5 years or so, we do have a share of revenues from tolls from 395 and 66. Of course, those can only be used to support the activities related to those programs. They're subject to your approval, of course, and they're subject to the CTB's approval as well. And one of the things that we have been able to do in past years, and there's a lot of variables at play, is the ability to carry over and use unallocated funds from the previous year where they're available. Typically, when we have big balances, it's usually because we've had staff change. And so we often have a gap in salaries and benefits. We're able to roll that over into the future year. And so that's an important thing to keep moving forward, just to understand it. When we look to the major cost drivers that make up our general administrative budget, no big surprise, salaries and benefits are 68% or so. So we are the people and the benefits associated with this work. Rent does make up about 10%. We do have a 13-year lease in our current location. And then about 17.5% or so is for contracted service. And what that really is folks like Amy. So our legislative services, our legal services, our human resources services, those are primarily what make up contracted services, as well as our technical support contract that we have to support commuter choice. So again, you know, the drivers are about DRPT funding, primarily commuter choice revenues, of course, and then really the carryover from previous years. So those are the things that we're very much watching as we develop our budget as well as our expenses. Now, the challenge, of course, we're sitting in October. It is incredibly difficult to predict what's going to be in 22. But we do know that DRPT is proposing for 21 to hold harmless at least their operating funds from 20. So we have sort of a sense of the general direction is at least it's the same, not necessarily going down. But we do know, and in fact, as Mr. Meyer was mentioning, the structural changes to transit funding in the state that were put in place through the omnibus bill in January have a very promising future for DRPT state aid to actually be going up. It should have actually been started to go up this year, but the structure does give promise that 22 will actually see a greater share of the Transportation Trust Fund going to transit. So that actually is a very promising thing for revenues that eventually would actually cover G&A for NVTC. Again, we just talked about commuter choice. We can't necessarily predict commuter choice funding, but again, we see that the 2022 will see greater funding than we're seeing right now. I think we obviously hit the basement of travel on that corridor, and it's already starting to pick up. And then finally, the one that I think was probably a really good education for me in working with Scott is understanding how we use carryover balances. And we've actually really been able to take advantage of that But the interesting dynamic that at play in the last year is we've hired folks and they've stayed. Now that's a really, really good thing for an organization. But what it does mean, we don't have this year, walking into next year's budget, we don't have that same 200,000 or so of carryover. We actually have a lot less. And so that is something that we're working through and figuring out. But what we do know and do expect, and obviously want to hear from you, is we do expect the 22 level of effort to be similar to what it is this year. We do expect that we're going to be managing around $200 million of state aid on behalf of our jurisdictions, as well as on behalf of VRE. We do have federal grants that we keep managing, and of course the commuter choice programs. The feedback that I've heard, our support to the jurisdictions and to the rest of the commission involving WMATA is something we have stepped up in the past couple of years. I'm expecting that's something you want to continue us with, that really strong support for that. Obviously watching what happens with COVID and travel patterns, all that data analysis, and continuing obviously to administer the funds in a good, financially strong way. So that's sort of what, I'm coming at it to you and presenting that. So what we're looking at as we move forward, and this is really the first sort of temperature check for all of you, is that at least the starting place for us is looking for a flat budget from last year, meaning that at a minimum, our bottom line operating budget stays whole to last year. We do know that that rents are going to go up, benefits go up, those sorts of things do go up, but we do are looking to cut other things in other areas. The challenge that we've got, that we see today, right now, is that we don't have the carryover balances that we've had in the past. And so keeping us staffed, freezing, holding our freezing of any hiring and things like that, is that we are probably short about just under $250,000 of a $3.8 million budget. But that's money that we would be, looking as being takedown from, again, the DRBT funding that goes to the jurisdiction. So that is a conversation I wanted to put out there. Actually, I should mention, sorry, but if we did a freeze hire, we actually do have a vacancy that we have not filled yet, sort of to be cautious. The gap would be about 140,000. And that gap, that position was something that we had heard very strongly about, which was a financial manager position. We're at a place I don't want to bring them on if we'd have to eliminate that position. So really the feedback I have and asking for all of you is that a reasonable gap to be looking at, of our $3.8 million budget is to see if we can seek an additional 250,000 from across all the jurisdictions from their state aid and move that forward. So Scott, did I miss anything?
No, I think you covered it very well, Kate.
Okay, great. So again, feedback, questions, concerns. We're just in the development phase.
Kate, just to get us started, I hope this isn't too pointed, but I just want to put an even finer point on something that you just said, which is to say that flat budget, increasing only by essentially inflation and staff increases or staff salary increases would be funded entirely out of jurisdiction's state aid. So you would not be coming to the localities to ask for more out of the general fund support, right?
That is correct.
Okay, I think that bears being a little explicit about, since I know all of us are preparing for catastrophe, right, with our local budgets. So on that optimistic note, any other questions for Kate or feedback as she and Scott and the team begin to develop something? Can we give them some insights to make sure that they're on the right path? I think I see a hand over there, Mr. Meyer.
I just want to confirm that one more time, that Kate, you said that the local jurisdiction's direct contribution has not changed in 12 years.
That is correct. It
So
does vary across different jurisdictions from year to year, but the total dollar amount has been fixed at 287,000 total since 2008.
And it varies from jurisdiction based on, refresh my memory on why it could change from one jurisdiction to another.
Scott,
Is
do
it-
you want to help me out?
Is it population or is it?
Yeah, no, so it's based upon the amount of each jurisdiction's share of revenue that comes through NVTC. So we take a percentage and each year it fluctuates a little bit. So we just reallocate that fixed amount among the jurisdictions.
Okay. Just as in my own local jurisdiction, I maybe it's a profiles and courage, but I go out and I make a defense of the staff and the services that we receive. I think it's important for all the jurisdictions to acknowledge that they get a tremendous amount from the NVTC, and the fact that overall the region hasn't really increased the overall support for the commission for 12 years is something that we need to keep in mind. And that this shortfall, and I don't want to use that word because that's really a misnomer, but as we go forward in the budget preparation, from what I'm looking at is less than 10%. It's somewhere, what, 7%, something like that. Out of 3.8, we're talking 200,000, and if you don't fill that one slot, it's half that. So I don't really see that as a significant concern. I think that we sharpen our pencils and make that up in some way. But we've got to have an open and candid discussion about that as we move forward. But I think that as an affirmation of everything that the commission has already done, that we should, I know staff is making every effort to try and recognize the unusual circumstances that we were all in. But having said that, I think that we ought to try and figure out a way to not balance this on the back of our employees necessarily, but to try and figure out and make an affirmation that this is what these are our priorities, and then find a way to fund it. That's just my view on that.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave, for getting us started with that good feedback. Other thoughts, particularly on that same topic, sort of interest in seeing at least a budget with that option?
I just say that I think Dave put it pretty well, and I'd be in agreement. I think that NVTC staff does a whole lot for the jurisdictions, to say it very, very plainly, if you will. But yeah, I think I agree with David that if it comes to that, I think the jurisdictions can figure something out, especially since it's been 12 years since we've seen any type of increase.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So this is Dave Snyder. So let me add, I think it's hard for me to really predict what the next fiscal year is actually going to look like from a local government standpoint. And I'd be reluctant to talk about anything that increases the obligations on the part of local government. I think the second headwind we're running into is with transit ridership dropping so much. Why do we still have this apparatus, and why are we still spending money at the level that we are on transit related issues and NVTC specifically? Now, I'm asking that question not because I agree with it, but I think there's going to be an environment here where all of us involved with transit are going to have to make a case pretty strongly. And so I think we ought to think about collectively what that case is.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I think you put your finger on the pulse of why this is so hard, is to try to make any judgments about this budget without knowing certainly what our local budgets are going to look like, but even what the recovery, hopefully, which is coming, is going to look like. So I wonder if my takeaway from this conversation so far, and please y'all chime in and let me know if you do this differently, is maybe to see options from Kate, which is to say certainly a flat budget, and then if there are other priorities, I'm hearing from a couple members of exec, there's some interest in entertaining them. But to Dave's point, we don't want to assume them, particularly without knowing what kind of hard conversations we're going to be having back in our localities. Does that feel about right? Is that kind of splitting down the middle? What do you all think?
They don't have a thumbs up emoji on WebEx.
Those are so helpful when you have them.
I do think that's a good question, Kate. And this same motif can apply to every budget category of every person that's on this call for their respective jurisdictions. And and I think that Dave is raising a very cogent observation that we need to. Obviously, we're months away from any adoption, but in terms of guidance, I think some options is probably the prudent approach for all of us to get our hands around this. We're going to do the same thing in our own budget preparations come January, and yet my comment to my citizens is beware of the tyranny of the moment. We need to take a longer view. When it comes to transit, it's always multi-year. It can be even decades in terms of the investments we make, and particularly capital improvements require a vision that's multi-year, if not many years. And I think that while it's draconian what we're experiencing, I do believe that if we step back and think of it, and where will we be in 3 years and 5 years, it's going to be quite different. And we need to ensure that we don't over-respond to the moment. But I think Dave raises a good point too.
All right, thanks, you all. So Kate, I mean, is that feasible as you think about what you'll come to us with for at least information next month? Or excuse me, December.
So. I would be happy, to hear about the other options, what you guys are envisioning. Again, just to remind, there's a couple different things. We can always amend the budget, of course, and we do have till January. So I think that's going to help us out a lot. And again, just to say that the amount that goes to the jurisdictions will not change. That actually is something that you're passing tonight. And so any additional is from DRPT aid. So that's the other thing, is if there's somehow some switch, something that happens with that state aid, we can amend the budget prior to July.
Very helpful.
Okay.
That's the benefit, actually, right, of it being so early, is that we have a full 6 months
yeah.
to keep iterating. All right, thank you. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and conclude this conversation for now, but I really appreciate the feedback. I suspect Kate and Scott do as well. And this certainly won't be the last time the executive committee or the full commission has this conversation. Okay, so to just briefly cover some upcoming commission activities, I hope you all received from me last week a draft of the questions to ask as part of our executive director's annual review, which is coming right down the pike. I did hear back from one member of the executive committee, and I'm going to assume that everyone else was all right with where that's headed. So please, this is just a note to say that you'll be receiving a survey to help Kate in her ongoing performance and leadership of the commission. And it would be terrific if you could allot really just 15 or 20 minutes to give some feedback so that we have some substantive advice for Kate as she continues to ably lead us in the year ahead. Okay, and then we have the committee meetings as well, but Kate, an announcement about the joint legislative briefing with our PRTC.
So we are doing again our joint legislative briefing with PRTC, but this time it's not going to be in Springfield. We're actually going to be doing through a webinar format, and we're still putting together the agenda, but we do have already invited Secretary Valentine, as well as Paul Feld, Rich Dalton, Bob Snyder, and others. We are investigating potentially having some federal elected officials joining us, but hold that spot until we get that confirmed. But we do hope to have a wonderful, albeit virtual, legislative session, and that is supposed to be on Monday, December 7th from 9 to 11 a.m. And indeed, that will be all online from the comfort of your home.
Can't be that. Thanks, Kate. Hope to see you all then. Okay, so I believe that is going to go ahead and conclude our executive committee meeting. Thank you guys for the time and the brainstorming today. We will see you again in 48 minutes. So we'll begin at 7 p.m. Notably, it's a different WebEx link. So if you don't have that separate WebEx link for the general commission meeting, please do email Kate and Melissa now so they can get that to you. Otherwise, I will see everyone at 7. Feel free to log on a few minutes early to work out any tech bugs. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you then.
See ya.
Thanks so much.